Community Agritecture is the efforts of a bunch of entrepreneurs and farmers and technologists in the space here in New York City, all trying to basically promote urban agriculture and make cities new food. And so we open up our doors, invite people to come and listen to learn experiences here and go away with some inspiration to do on their own.
Smiling at camera, that's how we do it.
I like it.
Is this you guys here videoing? Yes. Are you going to use extra light?
Is your name on there?
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our Food Policy for Breakfast seminar series and for participating in Urban Ag Week. I want to welcome you to Hunter College here in East Harlem. My name is Alexina Cather, and I'm the Deputy Director of the New York City Food Policy Center. Today we are honored to have several impressive and distinguished guests. Henry Gordon Smith, Managing Director and Founder at Agritecture, Alex Highstein, Senior Analyst and Corporate Development at AeroFarms, New York City Councilmember Rafael Espinal, Harrison Hillier, Hydroponics Manager at Teens for Food Justice, Tatiana Pawlowski of Brooklyn Law School. I want to thank all of the panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules to be here today, and special thanks to Henry Gordon Smith, our presenter, for helping plan the event. Let's welcome all of the panelists and Henry to the stage and thank him for his help in planning of today's event.
Good morning. Thank you for joining another early morning at NYC AgTech Week. I'm Henry Gordon Smith. I'm really happy to be here. And thank you, Alexina, for hosting us again today. So today, when I was preparing this talk, I wanted to just keep it brief and talk about the subject today, which is really creative ways of integrating agriculture into the concrete jungle. And so I wanted to kind of look globally and get some inspiration that might be able to apply to New York City. So while I typically talk about hydroponics and vertical farming, certainly the beginning of my conversation today is going to be a little bit about soil-based agriculture. And so I grew up around the world, so I wanted to look at some different places, including Canada, Cuba, and Japan, for some inspiration that we could learn about creative ways of integrating agriculture into New York City. So Cuba's done a lot since the blockade, when the Russian supplies weren't allowed to be provided to Cuba. And they've grown a supreme amount of food and are known as leaders in urban agriculture. But one of the things they've done that's really interesting is they've basically acknowledged that we'll incentivize certain individuals to grow food, but they have to grow a diversity. So if you're growing lettuce on your rooftop, the next person will be encouraged to grow something like tomatoes so that the whole system is more diverse. There's also an encouragement to actually have 50% of the revenue from these sales, which again provide more than just the community food, but also are sold throughout the community and beyond. But 50% of the sales remain in the city. So one of the key takeaways there are that we can really incentivize more urban agriculture to have a localized impact. As high-tech approaches to urban agriculture become more prevalent, there's going to be more yield and more economic value. It's important that we don't just become another conventional agriculture solution, but that money and that revenue continues to remain in the local economy. One example of that is Sky Vegetables. They were given incentives by the city, but they have to commit to 10% of the produce going hyperlocal into the building itself where they're located. So I think more models like that would be a creative way to encourage urban agriculture and its sustainability with the community in New York City. In Japan, they have this thing called weekend farming. Has anybody heard about this? Okay, so weekend farming is you're in the city, you've had this crazy week, and you decide to go with your family out to the farm and actually work on a farm for the weekend. So it's a bit like woofing, but for urbanites. And so I thought this was a really interesting one, and the demand for this has really risen in Japan as people want to escape the city and do something else with their family. So maybe there's some lessons there that we can learn from Jisan Jushu, and that local food consumption. My Japanese pronunciation was a disaster, but I tried. But I think this is really interesting, and I think this also is a solution to a problem we have, which is that urban agriculture is developing not necessarily in conjunction with rural agriculture and the advancements that are happening there, both in their sustainability, the technology they're using, and their commitment to local, which is a trend that's happening. So in order to create these conversations, what if instead of just pushing urban agriculture, we actually encourage more of a connection between rural and urban dwellers. The local urban dwellers would be able to then go to the farms and learn about agriculture and its complexity, and also be able to benefit from that produce. The idea would be that the end result would be that they consume more local food, it's just outside of the city, and that they're more aware of what they're buying when they go to the store, which is something that's important to all of us. In Canada, Curtis Stone, I'm sure you've heard about him. He's got amazing videos if you're interested in soil-based urban agriculture and converting vacant lots. But he's basically borrowed land for several years and even multiple lots and converted them and been able to make money off of those lots. Another example in Canada is in Vancouver, when a real estate developer buys a piece of land and they don't develop it, they're given a pretty heavy tax if they take too long to develop it, if that land is not being productive. That tax can be reduced if they put an urban farm on it or a garden. And I think that's a really interesting approach. We see a lot of vacant lots in the city, and urban agriculture can be done in a more modular and, let's say, flexible way that could be adaptable and moved to different locations. So I'd be excited to see how we could develop more technologies like that and really have farms that are temporary but kind of permanent, because there's always going to be vacant spaces and spaces that are under development when a building's demolished or so forth. So again, it's about utilizing those untapped resources that we have in the city. But how can we really encourage more than just the approaches that we've seen elsewhere? How can we have our own brand, our own approaches to urban agriculture in our city? Well, you've probably heard me say it before, but I'm a huge proponent of having an urban agriculture incubator in New York City. Really a place where entrepreneurs and policy leaders and sustainability-focused individuals and professionals can come together and really talk about urban agriculture and some of the tough questions, like what is the environmental impact and what is the divide between creating economic value, which is probably going to be driven by heavy automation in vertical farms, for example, and the need to create jobs. It's much more complex than just saying urban agriculture is good and we need to incentivize it. We need to talk about what the range of applications of urban agriculture are and which ones we're going to incentivize, where, and why. So that's not going to be easy to get, and we're going to need a lot of creative ideas to do that. So Electra, who you might have met, she's a Square Roots entrepreneur. She used to intern with us. She and our team conceived of an incubator space that would allow for different companies to have actual physical space that they could lease out and begin to experiment with different approaches to urban agriculture. The idea would be that they would get it for some discounted rate. In exchange for that, they would give up data So what is the labor impact of their approach? Is it positive? You know, is it an automated one? What is the water effluent that's going into the system? What is the energy consumption? What's their typical waste? And while these small systems, which would exist in this incubator, with say spaces that might have 500 to 2,000 square foot in space for these entrepreneurs to get started, they might not reflect large-scale commercial farms. There are things, there are insights we can draw from those in the way that they're designed and the way that they're managed that will benefit the city as a whole and also strengthen our community. A lot of our clients have a difficult time finding a space that they can get started with for the first 6 months, 12 months, and so it's really important to have that. We have some other ideas, including not so much weekend farming, but you can see there in the bottom corner we've got hobby plots. In Japan, they have a high-tech approach as well to weekend farming, where basically after work you can go and visit a hydroponic farm and tend to it a little bit, relax a little bit, and take that produce home with you. And I think that's a really interesting approach that a lot of New Yorkers would be interested in, because they can't really get access to a community garden. There's a lot of wait lists, and they also can't grow in the winter time. And so we've been developing some concepts for this space and also sharing those ideas with the city, and we will continue to do so in the hopes that we'll be able to get this incubator ready and continue to foment New York City's place as the leader in urban agriculture. Because leadership in New York City is really coming from the consumers who demand this product and also the entrepreneurs that have the vision to execute it. But for long-term sustainability and leadership in this space, we really need the data and we need the proven evidence that this is going to have a positive effect on this city and other cities. AgTech is a new venture that I've co-founded with Ricky Stevens. He's here. And this is us piloting a little bit of that. So how can we get young people excited about the space? What happens when we give them a physical space to learn and experiment? They can rent spaces by the day, the week, or the month. They get mentored, and they actually have hydroponic systems that they can experiment with. I invite you to check it out or participate in it. It's a great way to do that. But what we're really doing here is we're observing and experimenting to see how we can prepare for a time when hopefully the city supports this idea and we can get this off the ground and continue to demonstrate leadership. And this is what it's all about for me in the end, is people. You know, behind all this food, behind all this sustainability talk are people, and they're New Yorkers. They're people who have moved to New York like myself with a vision of making a positive impact. And what we really need to do is provide them a place to do that and provide them a way to accelerate their impact. It took me 6.5 years to get to the point where I am now. I believe it should take young people entering the space a much shorter time. And that's my commitment in the future with this kind of initiative. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really excited about this panel and to hear other creative ideas for urban agriculture.
Thank you, Henry. Wouldn't it be great to have weekend farming in New York City? So the rest of the panelists, you guys can please come up. So we're going to start off the panel today by having each of the panelists give a brief introduction and share their relationship to urban agriculture. And then I have some questions for the panelists, and then I promise to leave time at the end to open it up for your questions. So Henry, let's go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, so I first got interested in urban agriculture. I was a political science undergrad, and I met a guy who was farming people's backyards, not dissimilar from Curtis Stone. And I thought that was so crazy and cool, and so I wanted to write about it on a blog. And so I started a blog called Agritecture. It became popular. Then I had a big dream of coming to New York City and doing that. I had an interview with Bright Farms. I bought a one-way ticket to New York City to be an urban farmer. I didn't get the job, and I just started hustling and volunteering at greenhouses, including Sky Vegetables and Harlem Grown. And now, yes, this is where I am now, in this room.
Okay, we'll just go down the line. Right here, right now. Great.
Hi everyone, my name is Alex Highstein and I work at AeroFarms, and we are based right across the Hudson River in Newark, New Jersey. And my interest in urban farming actually is rooted in water scarcity. So fresh water most fresh water, about 70%, is used by farms in agriculture. And AeroFarms uses 95% less fresh water than a traditional farm. And that was kind of what initially attracted me. I've been working at AeroFarms for over 2 years now. It's really amazing. And in the past 2 years, we've gone from a company that is growing produce in a space about the size of this stage to a 70,000 square foot facility in Newark. Thank you so much, everyone, for having us here, and this is a really exciting opportunity.
I'm Councilman Rafael Espinal, and I represent the neighborhoods of Bushwick and East New York. I was actually born and raised in those areas, and I would say urban ag kind of really played a big role in my life growing up, because I had a backyard that my dad would do urban gardening as I was a child, and we would eat fresh fruits and vegetables. And you know, East New York is a food desert, so it's hard to have access to that type of food. So what really interested me was, one, how can we increase access to fresh fruits and vegetables, especially in food deserts like in East New York? And two, the effects that this can also have on climate change, and how the city can play a leading role in making sure that we are in the forefront of this conversation, and that we're able to help cultivate an environment where urban ag can continue to flourish.
Well, thanks for having me. My name is Hillier. I work with Teens for Food Justice. I actually went to school for agriculture. I went to the University of Maryland and got a bachelor's in plant and soil science, and then did some coursework on plant breeding down in North Carolina, and then immediately decided I wanted to come to New York and be a farmer. So I did, and I also didn't get the job. And then, yeah, I also started hustling, and here I am.
Hi everyone, my name is Tatiana Pawlowski. Thanks for having me as well. I am a recent graduate of Brooklyn Law School. So my background is really law and real estate. The way that I got interested in urban agriculture was through my law school's Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Business. And we were looking at what's the intersection of business law, and for me specifically, an interest of mine is the zoning code. And having taken zoning classes, I was really interested to learn more about how zoning laws can inhibit or encourage urban agriculture, and that led me to do an independent study on how other cities have expanded their urban agriculture programs, and it's turned into a white paper that's now going to be published in a couple months. And I'm really excited to see, you know, how this dynamic field develops in our city as well as across the country.
Great, thank you. We have so many interesting perspectives. So my first question is for the panel, and is what are some of the challenges in the New York City urban agriculture industry? I think we'd all assume cost is one of them, but what else is there that we might not be aware of? Zoning codes, restrictions, permits, that kind of thing.
I'm going to allow the experts to answer that question, because they actually have been leading the conversation on how the city could best move forward. But what I was able to do with the borough president of Brooklyn was introduce a bill that would force the city to actually sit down and take a year to come together and figure out what are the challenges the industry is seeing, what are the challenges that the city should get involved in, whether it be zoning, as you mentioned, whether it be creating incentives to help the industry deal with the cost. And I think at the end of the day, it's important for the city to get engaged at that level, because a lot of the concerns I hear from the industry is that they're not able to get seed funding, they're not able to get funding to help sustain their business, and investors are afraid to invest in this market, especially in New York City, because the city has not yet taken a leading role recognizing the work that's being done here.
Yeah, I think that's quite accurate. You know, when we approached the Brooklyn Borough President's Office as a collective, we surveyed all of the members and said, what problems are we facing? And there were some really common ones that everyone was facing, which was really access to land and space, especially at the beginning stages, was really important. But after that, once you've kind of figured out your first operation, you actually need to get a big one, right? You need to scale up. That's what it's all about. And so to go from, say, 1,000 square foot to a 10,000 square foot space is extremely difficult in New York City. And the delays in permitting, the fact that the Department of Buildings doesn't understand a lot of what urban agriculture is. Some of them might think it's on the outside of buildings instead of inside of the buildings. And so there's a lot of interpretation of code that's needed. There's a lot of expedition that's needed as well, because the timing is so critical in a lot of these projects to get investment. You know, they'll back out. They won't support the project if you don't find that space. So those are some of the challenges. I think the other challenges are, you know, finding access to basic talent, I would say, the beginning talent, the entry-level talent, because you have to spend a lot of money on training, on food safety. And so if the city had a training program that created, you know, a diverse skill set of urban agriculture, those people would be more equipped to get started in urban farms. And I think that would strengthen a lot of the businesses early on. Obviously, a lot of urban farms would be interested in some financial incentive for those jobs because it's very difficult. It's a very high operating cost, especially at the beginning, labor costs specifically. Other ones are just really about recognizing the value of local food. I think there's a lot of movement towards that now, but a lot of government institutions or a lot of markets themselves don't put local food first. And it's not just about the product and the quality of the product, but it's about the local economy. So I think creating more incentives, or rather more of a carrot to kind of get groups involved and excited about and promoting local agriculture from a top-down approach would really accelerate urban agriculture here.
One other thing that Henry and Rafael haven't covered is people in New York City and in urban areas often lack a connection to what they're eating and where it comes from. And I think that part of what could be done is spreading the idea that what you're eating is grown in the next street over, the next borough. And that's a really powerful thing. When people are connected with what they're eating, they tend to value it more, and they tend to appreciate the work and the effort that's gone into growing or producing whatever they're consuming. And I think that both New York City and perhaps some of the farms and incubators could work together to really spread those ideas and get people, especially young people, students and college students as well, involved and engaged in the community. Henry's done an incredible job in hosting events like this and AgTech Week, and more things like that would be terrific to spread the idea that we can grow food in our city and we can feed people in our city with farms in New York.
Just add a couple more things. Some of the challenges, as Henry has seen firsthand, that people face when they're looking to sort of start a new urban ag project is not only do the Department of Buildings, they don't really know how to handle an application, but the zoning code itself is difficult to read. It's very long. It hasn't been updated since like 1962. The word urban agriculture doesn't exist, or the phrase. It's just, it briefly talks about the fact that you can have, raised truck beds and community gardens. Otherwise, it's very, very silent on what can and cannot be done. And just by the fact that there is no concrete information, people might not know that technically farming is allowed in a very, very limited sense in residential districts. It is allowed in commercial and industrial districts. So if you don't have access to this information, if that information is not sort of modernized and organized and readily accessible, it kind of discourages future development and just kind of leaves people a little bit concerned as to how they can do, and it's particularly important and an issue on the sort of smaller individual scale for individual community residents who want to start their own smaller projects. Particularly in Councilman Espinal's district, that's something for individuals. You want them to have the resources, and they just don't have that as far as information is concerned. And then back to the larger scale situation, another thing that Henry has faced is that there isn't enough data. There's data that's kind of disorganized a little bit as far as where are the vacant spaces, how are these spaces utilized, where are the community gardens, is it legal to develop a new one? So the data is kind of available piecemeal, but what we need is a really well-organized, streamlined, centralized place for all the data to be readily accessible for everybody. Anyone else?
That about covers it, yeah.
Okay, great. So my next question, I'd like to talk a little bit about the economics of urban farming, especially in a city like New York, where residential and commercial spaces are so costly per square foot. How is urban agriculture cost effective, and how can technology make it more so?
Well, I mean, it becomes cost effective when you use the land in more than one way, like Sky Vegetables, that is atop a residential building. And technology will take us to a certain extent, but I don't know, everyone points to LEDs becoming more and more efficient, but the reality is that the cost of the LED modules keeps increasing because it's new technology. Okay. So I think what we need is more government incentives to lower the overall cost, because I don't see technology bringing it down.
Okay. And Henry, you talked about like just innovative ideas, using space that's already there. What else?
Yeah, so I think on the soil-based side, if you're getting a vacant lot or renting a lot in New York, it's going to be very difficult to make money off of that. So you're either going to be a community group that has to fundraise to maintain that operation and the benefits you're contributing to the community. That's the case for Harlem Grown, for example. They've been there for a while. They're making a positive impact, but that's very difficult economically and not necessarily commercial urban agriculture. So if you're going commercial and you're soil-based, you have to look at something like Brooklyn Grange. As Harrison said, they've also maximized space by using an unused piece of the property, the roof. But they've also really been very smart in how they distribute various activities. So they have a separate nonprofit that manages their nonprofit activities, keeps the space kind of engaging with the community, but doesn't affect their operation in a complex way. That's very smart, because in the end they're commercial growers and they need to focus on that. Simultaneously, they've set up their own group that does events at the space, and they charge a premium for the wonderful view and the wonderful experience that they have there. And that's quite common across the world with commercial urban agriculture that's soil-based, is you need to create other revenue streams, including events. If you look indoors, to Farm One, for example, in Manhattan, so the way they got space and the way they make it commercially viable is by creating a partnership with the host. So in the case of the Institute for Culinary Education, their laborers manage some of the systems that the Institute has, and in exchange they get to have that space for free. It also gives them a great access to ICE in general and to be able to create events there, and they've done a great job in charging for tours and creating value out of that space. If you go much larger, I think Alex can talk a lot about that, but I think the future of large-scale vertical farming, it's a debate whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but is automation, is understanding what we can learn from AI, machine learning, robotics, and I think that's going to really help, because when we look at a lot of the economic models for large-scale commercial farms, the operating costs are certainly high in the context of HVAC and lighting, but they're very high in the context of labor. And so that needs to be navigated and that needs to be managed for this to become economically viable.
As Henry mentioned, we do have a little bit of experience in growing in a large facility. And labor is certainly one of our expenses. We work with the New Jersey EDA, and they have a program called Grow NJ. And what they're doing is they're giving us essentially tax incentives for hiring. We're also working with the City of Newark to source labor from really fantastic places. So we work with a veterans program, we work with a reentry program, and these institutions essentially train people and bring them up to speed in terms of skills. Henry mentioned that there are large gaps in knowledge, so food safety is one of them. And these institutions can help train people and really get them off to a great start in the world of urban ag. The debate over AI and automation is a really interesting one that is only going to become more and more important. But I think that when people hear that, they assume that you're going to have a facility that's completely autonomous, but the reality is that you're always going to need people. And as AI and as automation become more and more of a component to these farms, the skills that those workers are going to need are only going to grow. So the integration of technology is an opportunity for a lot of people as well. And I think that the city and different educational institutions can play a big role in helping people get a foot in the door and bringing people up to speed in that world and getting ahead of the curve.
Okay, great, thanks. I've heard a lot of concerns about, especially on rooftop gardens, city pollution being harmful, and you talked a little bit about food safety and how it's pretty different in a city. What arguments do you commonly hear made against urban farming, and what is your response to them? This is for anyone on the panel.
I was just speaking about this earlier. So I've been getting a lot of emails, people who are against the idea of expanding urban agriculture, and their argument is that this is going to require more power, and using more power would in turn, create more plumes and create the sorry, I'm lost of words. But there's not enough green energy being produced in our city. Mm-hmm. So we're pushing the reactors to create more power because we're feeding plants ultraviolet light energy that again goes to the systems the city currently uses. So we're just pretty much increasing our carbon footprint in that way.
So do we have a solution?
I think my solution is to continue pushing for the 80 by 50 and making sure that the city changes its grids and make sure we're producing solar energy and wind turbines. So if we're able to get those systems in place, then that argument wouldn't be an argument that could be used against urban agriculture.
We were just talking about this, actually. It's a timely question. I think you have to, there's several different responses, right? You could look at Brooklyn Grange, who are growing on a roof without LEDs. And then you can also look at the energy that goes into what you would otherwise be eating. What we were chatting about earlier is, from a leafy green perspective, most of our produce comes from California. And what that means is that you have refrigerated trucks driving 3,000 miles across the country to bring you produce that's going to be subpar to what you can get locally. Refrigerated trucks are one of the biggest emitters of carbon monoxide. So there's an enormous carbon footprint to growing in a traditional sense and not eating locally. Additionally, people that are worried about the energy can look to sources of clean energy like hydroelectric and think about growing and using that sort of energy. Solar is becoming increasingly viable. And I think that we just need to be forward-thinking and think about solutions that we can adapt.
Yeah, you want to?
Yeah, just real quick. With respect to this energy use and our grid being sort of overloaded, one of the things that people forget about the benefits of specifically outdoor rooftop farming is the amazing effect that it has on mitigating the heat island effect, which is, you have a lot of blacktops, you have a lot of tar roofs, you have just streets and just the grid of the city. It creates heat. If the temperature is high, you're using more energy to cool. If you have a green roof, that can limit the heat island effect, I believe, by a couple of degrees, which is very, very significant. Moreover, the emissions, or the effects that it has on air quality, having trees, is very, very palpable. So there is a huge environmental benefit, which not only fits into the 80 by 50 plan, but it's good for air quality, it's good for communities, and it's cheaper. So that's a very big thing, I think.
Yeah, and the 80 by 50 plan, for those that aren't aware, is reducing our carbon footprint by 80% by the year 2050.
Yeah, I really agree with all the comments made. I think urban agriculture is extremely complex. There's so many different kinds of impacts, and I think we really need to continue to talk about that and remind ourselves of that it's not just about the yield produced. There's also the economic impact, the jobs, there's the aesthetic impact, there's the ecological impact of biodiversity in the case of soil-based farms, green infrastructure. So we have to look at the full picture. We can't just look at the energy consumption and the carbon footprint. Let's dive a little bit deeper. What about resiliency? When Hurricane Sandy hit our city, most of the soil-based urban farms were damaged because they're exposed to the environment, while a lot of the indoor farms were not. Thankfully, we got to keep some of our power on the grid. So there are some risks there as well. I'm not saying they're not, but there's a huge opportunity to create food security through these high-tech approaches and through indoor agriculture for this city. We have about 2 days of food if Hunts Point is cut off from its distribution, and Hurricane Sandy just missed Hunts Point. There's a very interesting report about that and what that would have done to our city. Then let's talk about the knowledge needed, right? The average age of the U.S. farmer is 53. So where are the farmers of the future going to be? If they're all moving to the city, where are the farms of the future going to be? And I think we really need to recognize that looking at carbon footprint is not enough, and we need to look deeper at what is our future society and what role will agriculture play, and that's where urban agriculture begins to really shine, when we see that we can accelerate people's knowledge of the food, water, energy nexus through this approach, which is going to get us to sustainable development in the end.
Yeah, I have to say that looking only at carbon footprint or the energy consumption is very narrow focused. In Maryland, we have the Chesapeake Bay, and it's part of our culture and it's part of our pride as a state. But also, it's dying because we have a lot of fertilizer runoff from our farms that get to the watershed and cause toxic algal blooms. And if it's not poisoning the oysters or the crabs, it's stripping all the oxygen out of the water. And that doesn't happen on indoor farms. And it's easier to mitigate on rooftop farms. So if you're only concerned about your electrical consumption and you're only concerned about the carbon monoxide that refrigerator trucks are putting out, you're missing a lot of the picture. You know, you can use none or at least minimize your pesticide use with urban ag, and so it is not possible for it to get into our water supply. And we are great at cleaning our water, but it's not perfect. And we're finding more and more that there are chemicals that we put there that we're not getting back out of our drinking water. So if we can stop that from happening by creating really a patchwork of different agricultural methods instead of just soil-based or just indoor, that's really the way to go.
I think those are all really great points, and while it doesn't relate necessarily to pollution or energy, also considering the community and education benefits for urban agriculture, which we definitely will get to. So we talked a little bit about the challenges, and now I'd like to talk about the opportunities. In what ways do you think urban ag can fit in with the city's goals, specifically around economic and sustainable development?
I mean, I think some of the points are already brought up, right? You know, we're gonna be able to create jobs. One of the mayor's goals is to create 50,000 new jobs, I believe, in the next 10 years. There's another goal of, again, reducing our carbon footprint, and as was mentioned earlier, we're gonna reduce the heat island effect. We're gonna create better air quality, and again, reduce our carbon footprint by reducing the amount of trucking that's going on. So I think it will deal with a whole host of issues that the city is really focused on tackling over the next 4 years.
Yeah, I think we need to do even more to tie in jobs with urban agriculture, because that's how we're going to get the city even more excited about it. And I'm just amazed in the past 6.5 years how many new ideas with this technology have been approached, and that's a testament to the power of ideas. You know, Dixon Depomier's book, Dr. Dixon Depomier's book, The Vertical Farm, I have met so many people who have started vertical farms based upon that book, even if it doesn't give them a technical guide on how to do it. And I think that's really interesting, and that's one of the reasons why I started my blog, was to help inspire more people to get involved, and that's what's happened, and we see so many new people entering the space. The problem is that the people entering the space are not as diverse as they should be. So in New York City, we need to really be contributing those ideas in the communities that are struggling the most, and showing those individuals that they can be entrepreneurs as well in this space, and that they can grow a lot of food in less space, and that this is knowledge that they can learn how to manage as well, and invent and create. And I think that that's also really aligns well with what makes New York City special. It is really the city of dreams. It's a city where opportunity exists, and I think tying those two things together will help accelerate this.
Okay, great. So my next question is kind of targeted at Alex and Henry, but anyone can feel free to jump in. I'm thinking a little bit about the eager millennial. What advice do you have for those trying to get involved in urban agriculture? And what are some of the barriers to entering the market aside from the cost issues we discussed? And are these issues unique to New York City?
So I think that one way that anyone can get involved is just by asking if an urban farm needs an extra hand, if they need a volunteer for a few hours a week, or if they need someone to come in on weekends. Anyone who's worked in urban farming knows that labor is a struggle, and any extra hands is always something that's appreciated. I think that there's so much information available online. There's, you know, Henry talked about Dr. Dixon Depamier, and just reading his book or reading any blogs or reading Henry's blog really is a fantastic way to get involved. We're hiring. AeroFarms is hiring. I would suggest checking our website, aerofarms.com. Grow with us. And it is a growing industry. We're not the only people that are hiring. There's a lot, and there's lots of different ways to get involved. We were chatting earlier about whether or not a curriculum for urban agriculture exists, and to the extent that that could be used to enter the market. But the reality is that there's so many specializations in urban farming, that anyone with an engineering or a marketing or a food safety or nutrition background can get involved. The barriers to entry perhaps are much smaller than people perceive them to be.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I say this a lot, the same 3 steps. So number 1, you want to build your archive. I experienced a lot in the early days that I would go to these conversations with Bright Farms or other companies, and they kind of saw me as this person who was writing about the space but didn't really understand the data, what people are really growing, the investment, the energy consumption. You need to understand that. You need to be able to talk about that confidently. And a great way to do that is to actively engage in gathering that information as you're observing, attending these events, reading different blogs. You want to capture that. It's very easy to do in Google Sheets or a notebook. It depends how modern or classic you are. And you want to just capture that knowledge. I want to emphasize it again. So number 1, build your archive. Number 2, get hands-on experience, which Alex definitely talked about. So I volunteered at Harlem Grow. There's a number of community farms. You also are going to want to diversify to commercial farms. It'll be harder to get those jobs or to get volunteer experience there, but even just participating in an event like this and going to tours is going to help you. What you want to do on those tours or those volunteer opportunities is to really observe every single step of the process. From seed to harvest, packing, food safety. What are the problems the farm is facing, and how might you be able to play a role in fixing that? Again, that's going to give you a huge amount of confidence and experience when you're in an interview to say, I've actually worked on this farm, and this is what I thought of it, and this is how I improved it. You really need to have those kinds of, that meat in any kind of interview. The last part is to grow your network. And I think a lot of people think, oh yeah, I network, I'm on LinkedIn, I connect with people, I go to events, I give business cards. One of the things that I learned early on is the best way to network is to think about what you can give to somebody first. It's going to give you a lot of confidence when you approach them. It's going to give you a capacity to really think about them and what matters to them, observe them. And that's the key to building relationships, is listening to people and understanding what's going to help them be successful. After you've helped them out, or at least approached them and offered something to them, it's going to be much easier to start talking to them about what you're interested in and what you need. And I think that's really a great way to improve your network. As a foundation, underneath those 3 steps, I highly recommend that you do not be afraid to brand yourself. As Alex said, there's so many different ways you can enter this industry, from marketing to engineering to growing. Really, there's really so many. So think about what you're good at and how it can apply to this space. Commit to that brand for a little while, especially if you're a new and eager millennial. Say, hey, I'm Henry, I'm a blogger about urban agriculture, I'd love to interview you. People will remember you and they'll refer you to other people, and that's going to really accelerate your entry into the space. So those are my tips.
Great, thank you. So Alex, I know AeroFarms is based in New Jersey, but do you or anyone else on the panel know if there are funding opportunities available to entrepreneurs looking to launch urban ag businesses in New York City, and also how about those for nonprofits?
Right, as you mentioned, we are based in New Jersey, and most of my expertise in funding, it comes from a larger scale perspective that's based in New Jersey. But that being said, there are so many opportunities, there's so many incubators, and there's so much interest in farming that I think that if you have a really good idea and you want funding for it, and you approach an incubator or you approach different investor networks, or even participate in Ag Weekend and meet different people that are interested in hearing your idea, you can certainly spread the word and get interest. And that would be my recommendation.
Anyone else?
I suppose speaking from the nonprofit, we have received encouraging amount of help from council members and borough presidents' offices. We're also constantly applying to grants. A lot of medical organizations like the American Heart Association are looking at diet as a means of preventative care. And along that line, we have partnered with hospitals that run clinics in the schools that we're looking to build farms in for the same reason. We've also partnered with energy companies that want to be seen as being green, using solar energy, and being partnered with organizations that use a lot of LED lights. So I think, speaking to what Henry said, you have to think about what you can offer the other person, how your personal brand can synergize with these for-profit brands. And the money's out there. I mean, it's not necessarily going to be easy to get it first. There's definitely a tipping point that you'll have to get to. but it's definitely out there.
Okay, great, thanks. And Harrison, so you have an interesting perspective because you deal more with the nitty-gritty of actually building and advising hydroponic gardens. So I'm wondering, how difficult is it to actually build a hydroponic farm? Like, how much space and capital do you need?
Right, so that's the nice thing about urban ag and the nice thing about hydroponics is that it's very scalable. So our first farm, which is out in Bed-Stuy, is in a 500 square foot classroom, and we probably utilize around 200 square feet of growing space. All told, the system cost, so the actual nuts and bolts, was around $20,000. Now again, we are in a school, so we're not footing the electricity bill, and then there's consumable costs such as your growing media, which you're constantly going to be buying more of, your fertilizers, which you're constantly going to be buying more of, and then there's always improvements to your systems because, as I said earlier, the technology is always moving forward. Our farm that we're currently building at DeWitt Clinton High School up in the Bronx, the budget for the nuts and bolts was around $80,000, and the money spent on retrofitting the room was around $70,000. So just for materials costs, and that doesn't include paying people to actually manage the farm, and again, your consumable cost was about $150,000 for 1,300 square feet of farm. Our idea is to actually have a production farm as opposed to an experiential learning facility for the kids. So in Brooklyn, we have space for kids to be taught lessons, to hang out, to be in the space. In the Bronx, it's a farm. It puts out a lot more, but there's significantly less what you would call human space.
So what's the output in Brooklyn? How much are you hoping to get from
Well,
that space?
we pull about 1,200 pounds a year out of a science classroom in Brooklyn. Also, being in a science classroom, we did not have to retrofit that room. There was already sufficient electrical capacity and plumbing. In the Bronx, we needed to have the electrical capacity in the room expanded and new plumbing introduced into the room. But that room will put out over 20,000 pounds of food every year.
And where do the vegetables go?
Into the school. The students have cooking demos. We put it into the cafeteria as often as we can. In the Bronx, we intend to sell through Montefiore's farmers market that they already host there.
So that's obviously a cost benefit.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So Tatiana, you talked a little bit about this, about your white paper, which I enjoyed reading the executive summary of. Talked about how New York City is leading the way in urban farming, but also how much more can be done to bolster it to meet New York City residents' needs. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Sure. So obviously, New York City is very unique because we're huge. We have a large population. We have 5 very, very diverse boroughs. And we have, everyone in a particular neighborhood has a different set of needs, and every neighborhood kind of has a different set of opportunities. We were talking about this earlier a little bit, that when you're in a borough like Queens or Staten Island, you could have, a regular soil farm. And like the space, obviously space is competitive everywhere, just the price of real estate in New York City in general, there's a premium on it. But depending on which borough you're in and which space you're in, there's more opportunities to actually have a farm on the ground. Whereas where space is very, very limited, you have to get creative, which is exactly why urban ag is so important. So in certain places that are zoned for commercial and industrial use, you can have an aeroponic farm. You can have vertical farming. You can have a lot of things grown in very, very small spaces. Obviously, you need more some upfront funds for that. But so, there are a lot of opportunities to kind of make modular use, efficiently. On the individual level, we have a lot of unused basements. One thing that the city has been interested in for a very, very long time is putting basement farms in NYCHA buildings. There are many of them. It would be a huge social benefit to the communities. And just generally to pivot, on the social benefits scale, if you have a community garden, if you have a basement farm in a community, it gives people a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. Horticultural therapy is real. You know, people love to get involved, just knowing where your food comes from, putting the effort into growing food and cultivating it, having food to take home with you, like actual fresh produce. These are social benefits that really strengthen people in a number of ways. As far as schools are concerned, we're already doing a lot of that in pretty much every borough. The mayor has been very, very motivated about introducing rooftop farms and greenhouses in schools. And you know, the numbers just keep growing. There's a lot of companies such as Sunworks who exist just to do this. And students really love it. One of the big benefits to putting this up in schools and introducing young children to urban agriculture is they find out where their food comes from. They find out how food grows. They eat it. They take it home to their parents. They tell their parents. Sometimes their parents don't know what it is that they're growing and what they're eating. And kids come home and they're excited and they want to be healthy and they want to get involved. So these are, you know, the kind of potential things that could be happening. Some of them already are. But it's basically because we're, you know, we have kind of a limited set of space, and because funding is an issue, we just need to utilize the little corners of what's free and available a little bit better. I think we're getting there.
Great. So in talking about kids, we know that Stephen Ritz and the Green Bronx Machine are doing amazing things in the South Bronx by including farming in core science curriculum, and of course Harrison, you guys at Teens for Food Justice. I just want to talk a little bit more about the potential for urban agriculture as a teaching mechanism for kids, both with science and as you talk to, you know, as a messenger for their parents about eating healthy food.
Yeah, well, the potential is limitless. I gave some thought last night trying to think of what you can't teach someone in an urban farm, and I couldn't think of anything. You have biology, as the plants grow and uptake nutrients. You could teach them about plant morphology. You could teach them about chemistry. You could use the lights to teach them about physics. If you have sufficiently complicated machines, they could write code to control the HVAC or the lighting. You could teach them about ecology. You could teach them about the predatory nature of white flies and symbiosis between fungus and plants. There's nothing you can't teach them. As long as you have someone who is enthusiastic enough to write the curriculum and create a thinker, there's nothing you can't teach them.
Anyone else?
Sure. We have a small farm in the Phillips Academy Charter School in Newark, and I think that the only thing that you may not have covered is one of the coolest and most interesting things that people are learning is healthy eating habits. You have kids that are engaging with their food and becoming really interested in delicious vegetables really early on in life, and they carry that with them not only throughout their lives but through their family life, and they propagate that information in their social networks as well. And it's a really powerful thing.
We teach that too.
Everything.
Everything.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I just want to share something else. So while at Agritecture Consulting, we mostly focus on commercial agriculture projects. Our first client was Phillips School, not Phillips Academy, in Maryland, and it's a special needs school, and the CEO there had a really amazing vision of how vertical farming would help the students there. And these students have a very difficult time. They really don't have a place in general, but certainly their school lacked a lot of kind of greenery, and they had the vision of using vertical farming to teach STEM, which is what Teens for Food Justice is doing. That's what's happening with the AeroFarms school as well. And it's been hugely successful, and so they grow microgreens in different systems. In the first program, in the first room, they learn how to maintain the systems, they learn math, science, all of it. And then after that, they start to move into being actually semi-commercial growers. So they're now finishing building out a commercial kitchen and more microgreen systems where they're actually going to learn to actually cook with the food and package it and brand it and market it. And so now these students actually have an opportunity when they didn't before to actually have a job afterwards. And really, these individuals normally have almost no opportunities in life in general. And so this school helps them in a number of ways, but now they can actually enter the food services industry. They can work in supermarkets, they understand food safety, they understand how to talk about this with the customers, they understand how to maintain inventory, they understand how to deal with accepting product and all the inventory related to that. So those are really valuable skills that can be taught through this. And I think a lot of skills that a lot of young people in general have lost as a result of urbanization that can be brought back, whether they're special needs or not.
Great. And what about opportunities for adults? Specifically, I've heard about employment success for individuals on the autism spectrum.
Yeah, Vertical Harvest is an excellent example of that, and Capabilities is another example of that, a greenhouse near Cape Cod. You know, there's a repetition to indoor agriculture and hydroponics. It's really about building good habits to be successful, and those are the kinds of activities that really help people on the spectrum really improve their lives and maintain stability. And so it really is a great alignment, and I think we're going to need to see more of it.
If I could just regress to talking about kids again.
No,
So we also teach them, it's a difficult topic to broach because they are so young, but we take the students around their community and show them where good food is available, whole food is available. And so we try and spark the critical thinking of why isn't it here? This is what healthy whole food is. And now I've tasted it and want it and realized that it's not here. Why isn't it here? And in doing so, we take steps to empower them to demand the things that will make their community healthier. So it's not just STEM and it's not just nutrition, but also the social justice aspect of why isn't the healthy food in my neighborhood? And what can I do to make that so?
Great, okay. And Councilmember, you talked a little bit about this before, but for those here who aren't familiar with your bill, can you talk a little bit about the bill to develop a comprehensive urban agriculture plan?
Yeah, I mean, if you've seen me texting, it's because we're actually making progress.
That's great.
So I have a meeting at 1 o'clock to talk about when we can have the first official public hearing on this bill. But what the bill does is forces the city to seriously sit down, get a team together, and figure out what are the limitations the industry is seeing, right? We're talking about zoning, we're talking about other regulation and codes that maybe the fire department, the buildings department are not aware of or familiar with. So it's going to give them a year. This was actually done in Boston a few years ago, and Boston was able to create this report that the city was able to implement policy to deal with all those issues, right? So we're just trying to mirror that and have the city do the same. Let's create regulation around whether, you know, from issues dealing with the beehives to dealing with basement farming and hydroponics, is how do we create a policy where the industry doesn't get tied up if an agency doesn't understand how to move forward with giving them the permits they need to continue to operate in our city.
Great, okay. We look forward to hearing more.
Yep.
So, as promised, I want to open it up and give anybody in the audience a chance to ask a question. I'll get the microphone to you. Please tell us your name and who it's for.
Hi, my name is Mick. This is a question, I guess, for Henry, Alex, and Harrison. Henry, you mentioned the vulnerability of the city, especially when it comes to climate change. And Harrison, you mentioned the withering of the Chesapeake Bay. Now, between what you guys are doing collectively, and that you have a captive audience, particularly of young millennials who are interested in entering farming as it is now being made more modern on the scale of Agritech, either from just an app in the field or full-scale automated AI farms. Do you think that there is an additional responsibility to say to such an audience that in addition to what you're doing, we have to be mindful of what is being done currently with soil-based traditional farming, especially to reduce runoff, to keep topsoil, and to some degree sequester more carbon in the soil? Is there something beyond what you're doing to acknowledge, yes, we're doing this, and please be mindful, because we're ag, there's also the non-urban aspect of this?
I think that right now we're mostly focused on CEA, or Controlled Environment Ag. So what you say is absolutely correct. but as an organization, we're more focused on what can be done in the city limits.
I think that you kind of only have to look to the news to really get a sense of what's happening in the traditional agriculture world, especially in places like California, where every few years there's not enough water to grow produce, and most of the state is in severe drought. I think that some of the technology that both urban farms and controlled environment farms use and outdoor farms use is comparable, and in terms of plant monitoring, in terms of sensors, and in terms of collecting information. So while we're not specifically pointing millennials in the direction of outdoor farms, there is a big overlap, or there is a sizable overlap in certain areas.
I had a professor at Columbia, Sarah Chosom, and I went there all excited about vertical farming and it being the solution to everything. And she reminded me that, especially in agriculture, technology is a double-edged sword, and it always has been. And when mechanized equipment came to farming, that changed a lot. Suddenly, you had a whole new series of problems. And so I think that we typically get blinders on, and that's common as humans, and we need to always diversify our perspective. That's one of the things that I'm trying to do with my team. The hype of vertical farming has been great. It's really accelerated it in a lot of ways, but with that comes a certain cost, and so we need to begin to ask some of the tougher questions. So as a collective, we've already talked about having some events that are actually not just focused on urban agriculture, but are really focused on creating conversations between rural and urban farmers. While urban farmers can be very creative with their space and how to work with cities and how to manage labor, soil-based farms outside of the city can teach us a lot as well. And so we really need to create those conversations to build a larger and more resilient food system as a whole. One of the things that I'm doing is I'm going down to Cuba to take an agroecology course, trying to diversify my skill set, my knowledge, so that I can remain as a diverse advocate for urban agriculture.
There's no doubt there's a problem with agriculture as it is now in terms of the pesticides and the residues and so forth, and that we're getting, yes, less nutritional yield from the produce that we are creating. Has anybody put this produce under a microscope to see what the nutritional density is compared to conventional?
I'm sure AeroFarms has.
Before that answer, sorry, I have to step away.
Okay. That's all they do.
But it's a pleasure being here. Thank you so much. Yeah. I'll keep everyone updated on the progress we're making today. It looks very positive. So thank you guys. Appreciate it.
So we haven't officially put nutritional values on the back of our packaging, but we have done some of our studies. We employ a fantastic registered dietary nutrition who happens to be sitting right here. And the studies that we've done have shown, unofficially of course, that the nutritional density in what we're growing is significantly higher than what typically comes from a soil-based farm. A lot of that is because what is grown traditionally is grown to withstand drought, grown to withstand pests, and grown to withstand transportation. Whereas what we focus on is taste, texture, and of course nutrition.
Yeah, I think freshness is a huge driver in leafy greens for nutritional value, and so I think that's also a way to think about it. If a product is fresher, it's most likely going to be more nutritionally dense, and that's what urban farms can provide.
Hello, I am an eager millennial, and
What's your name?
Maya. Part of the common pitch for urban agriculture is fewer food miles. The food is going to be more nutritious because it's fresher. We were just talking about that. But commercial operations in New York City at the moment are mostly producing leafy vegetables. So there's lettuce, there's microgreens, there's herbs, but we're not really producing flowers or fruit. I think Gotham Greens actually used to produce tomatoes and stopped. So I kind of think of this as the fruit frontier because I know it's a lot harder to flower and fruit horticulturally. And we're only just figuring out how LEDs can help in that process, et cetera, et cetera. So can you guys speak to that a little bit?
Yes, so we grow tomatoes in our classroom in Brooklyn, and we will be growing them up in the Bronx, and they're our most labor-intensive crop. because we cannot introduce pollinators into a school, people would really they'd freak out if we let bees loose in the school. That's just what would happen. So we have to go through and hand pollinate each cluster of flowers with an electric toothbrush. And while you can get great tasting fruit, it is very labor intensive. We tried to grow squash, and the problem there was you have male flowers and female flowers, and they only open at the start of the day, and for us that's midnight. So the thing with indoor ag is that you build machines and you fine-tune them to grow a particular crop. And right now, microgreens, leafy greens, they're the easiest to grow. So they're the easiest to build machines for.
They're not only the easiest to grow, but they're the most nutritionally dense. So part of the effort in urban agriculture is providing a stable nutritional food source, and that's a fantastic way to do it. Additionally, apart from the huge labor cost, there's an increased electrical cost per pound, and you get less yield. Basically, you can eat less of the plant with fruit. They take longer to grow, and there are additional challenges that don't exist in the leafy green market, generally speaking.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a number of reasons why you're not seeing tomatoes grow in LED light commercially right now. Think about replicating the sun and growing something. Well, if that product only has 20% edible biomass, if only 20% of the product that you spent the energy on is edible, that's going to be a very difficult economic case. With a leafy green, it's much higher, 90+%. So that's why it makes sense. Also think about the kind of capital, if you're looking at, $250 a square foot for a 4-level system. If you're looking at that kind of capital cost, it's very important you get cash flow early on. Tomatoes going to take a long time before you get the first cash flow. And also, tomatoes are a commoditized product, and so it's just a difficult market in general. I think when we're looking at sustainable agriculture in general, though, I think tomatoes, and other fruit crops need to be grown in greenhouses more efficiently than they are now, in a more automated way that can reduce the labor cost. And I think that those should also be incentivized closer to cities, around the city. I think that there is a place for those to grow certain crops. But I don't necessarily think it makes sense to grow leafy greens in greenhouses outside of the city. I think that those make a lot more sense in vertical farms. So it's about identifying what are the right technologies and the right systems to those. And that's why we need a top-down approach to it. It's also going to be very difficult for these entrepreneurs to diversify their crops if there aren't incentives to do so. If there isn't financial incentives to do research, AeroFarms has got some money for research, which is fantastic. So if we need more of that to diversify the crop selection, everybody in urban agriculture, especially CEA, understands that diversity is part of the future of this business, and we need to figure that out. But it's very difficult to do that, as I said, for the reasons of cost and cash flow and energy needed to grow those crops.
Right. And I think that just one last component of this conversation is something we've touched on earlier, which is the interplay and the relationship between traditional farms and urban farms. As Henry mentioned, there are certain crops that urban farms exceed and excel at growing at. And there are certain crops that we have a lot more difficulty doing, and fruit is one of them. And that is a fantastic sort of separation between what should, from an economic perspective, be grown traditionally and what has a lot of room to be grown in an urban setting.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi. My name is Tor Tors. I'm a New York real estate professional. And I've been around to a lot of different entrepreneurial conferences. I'm involved in one at my university. And the question I want to ask is, how do you bridge the gap between what's happening here and kind of the mainstream motivations of many millennials and people in our society in general to, find the killer app, create that thing to disrupt an industry which is going to make you a billionaire, And I kind of have the feeling that that is one of the underlying motivations of all these, eager millennials at WeWork and striving in our society to just get that $1 billion. So I think here we see this as a survival issue. I know I do. But how do you kind of bridge that gap between, to create a broader motivation for folks?
I can quickly speak to that. So part of what we do at AeroFarms is we monitor our plants. We monitor their nutrition intake, we monitor their growth, and that's done via an app. So and actually field farmers do this as well. All of this is kind of app-based. The world of sensors is rapidly expanding, and there are needs to monitor these inputs and these levels in real time. And, we have PLC engineers that look at their phones and can tell you how our grow systems are doing. So from our perspective, there's a lot of room for apps and for big business. There are farms that have just raised hundreds of millions of dollars. So if you're looking for the next unicorn, or you're looking for a big fundraising round, I think you just have to look to what's already been done, and it's out there.
Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about that attitude in general in our generation. I think especially in the context of urban agriculture, it's going to be few and far between that are going to be the billionaires of the future and the killer apps. And so it's a bit of a dangerous attitude because it forces you to ignore the other impacts of urban agriculture and only focus on one, the number of downloads for your app or the amount of money you raised. And it's so much more complex than that, and we're really only scratching the surface. So while I respect those that have been successful in doing that, I'm concerned about the long-term cost of inflated valuations and a pursuit of only that. I think that's repeating the same mistakes that have existed in our society and have caused economic collapse in the past. And so if we're trying to do something bigger than just make money, which is why I entered urban agriculture, and I think what resonates with it for a lot of millennials, which is I want to be able to support myself and progress while also making another impact, then don't forget those other impacts you're making. Don't forget how you're impacting the community. Don't forget how you're impacting the environment. And try as an entrepreneur to judge yourself not by how much money you're making, but by how much impact you're making.
Yeah, the need for instant gratification is prevalent in society, and there's not a whole lot of ground for that in agriculture. If you have to watch something grow and you know there's going to be, even if you can minimize the growth of a head of lettuce to 4 weeks, it's 4 weeks. It's not like when you're building an app and you're writing code and something doesn't work, you just go back and rewrite the code. You can't do that with a head of lettuce. You can harvest it or you can let it die, but you still have another 4 weeks until it gets to the point where you're back making new ground. It just doesn't work that way. Even if you can incorporate computers into your agriculture, you're still growing plants or raising livestock, or you have a living component that you can't circumvent its life cycle completely. So I don't know. Yeah, it's tough.
One other thing though, there is a large portion, or there is this sense of creating a killer app and having a billion-dollar company that's prevalent among millennials, but there's also a really great sense of desire to live a meaningful and purposeful life and doing things that aren't just about a financial reward. And I think that what Henry said, and his interest in urban farming is much greater than money, and I think probably all of ours is. And if your interest was only in the financial returns possible from urban farming, you probably wouldn't be sitting here today. And I think that speaks quite a lot to that attitude and that desire to have a better future for our planet, our city, and for ourselves.
Well, thank you all so much for coming today, and thank you to our wonderful panel. Let's give a hand. And a couple quick things. Thank you to Alina and to Henry for helping plan. So make sure to check out nycfoodpolicy.org to sign up for our weekly news digest, and check our site, which has about 3 to 4 original articles a week. Talk about our upcoming events real quick. We have our next event on Thursday, October 12th, which is Innovative Restaurants in New York City. We have Chef Michael Anthony from Gramercy Tavern, and also Adam Eskin from Dig In, a few other great names, so that should be really exciting. And I think we have a few more seats. It's almost sold out. And then something I'm really excited about is our first all-day event. It's going to be a Food is Medicine Summit, and it's going to be amazing. I'm really, really excited. So if you sign up for our newsletter, we'll have registrations going to be released within the next week or two, and I think it's going to sell out very, very, very quickly. We're partnering with Grow NYC, Fresh Med NYC, Dig In's providing lunch. We'll have some other great culinary sponsors, and also Edible Manhattan is going to be a media partner there. So just a teaser of some of the amazing speakers we have lined up include Dr. Robert Graham, Dr. David Katz, Stephen Ritz, Michelle Mouchon, and many more. So hope to see you all there, and thank you. Have a good day.
Just want to remind you there is one other big celebration tonight at the Institute for Culinary Education. It's the last event of NYC AgTech Week. You can excite your taste buds with produce grown from the farms and displayed to you in a beautiful culinary arts way. If you have questions about that, you can approach me or Lena. Tickets are still available at nycagtechweek2017.eventbrite.com. Sorry to get the last word, Alexina, but I had to say that. Tonight, don't miss it.
All right. Take care.